Welcome to Can AI Be Creative? A public dialogue with Sheila Heti, Aarthi Vadde, and Tanja Grubnic. My name is Menina Jones, and I'm chair of the Department of English and Writing Studies. I'd like to begin this afternoon's event by acknowledging that Western University is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chinook nations on land connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples who are vital contributors to our society. So, here is the format for this afternoon's event. I will introduce the three speakers all at once. We'll start with a short introductory lecture by Dr. Aarthi Vadde from her book In Progress, titled We, the Platform, Contemporary Literature After Web 2.0. This talk will lead into a dialogue with Sheila Heti, led by Tanja Grubnic, followed by a Q&A from among our panelists. So first, Sheila Heti is the Alice Munro Chair in Creativity in the Department of English and Writing Studies here at Western University. Sheila is the author of 11 books, including Alphabetical Diaries, which Zadie Smith called a future classic, and the novels Pure Color, Motherhood, and How Should a Person Be? She was named one of the new vanguard by the New York Times, a list of 15 writers from around the world who are shaping the way we read and write fiction in the 21st century. Her books have been translated into 25 languages. Motherhood was chosen by the book critics at the New York Times as one of the top books of 2018, and New York Magazine chose it as the best book of the year. How Should a Person Be was named one of the 12 new classics of the 21st century by Vulture. It was a New York Times notable book, a best book of the year in the New Yorker, and was cited by Time as one of the most talked about books of the year. Pure Color is the recipient of the 2022 Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction. Dr. Aarthi Vadde is Associate Professor of English at Duke University. She is the author of Chimeras of Form, Modernist Internationalism Beyond Europe, which won the Harry Levin Prize from the American Comparative Literature Association. She is the co-editor of several volumes, including the 11th edition of the Norton Anthology of English Literature and the Palgrave Handbook on 20th and 21st Century Literature and Science. She has been a fellow of the National Humanities Center in the United States. She is currently part of the Responsible AI Curriculum Design Project, dedicated to developing humanities-centered courses in universities across the United States to help students understand the social and ethical dimensions of these new technologies. And last but not least, Tanja Grubnic is a PhD candidate in English here at Western. Her dissertation, titled Art or Con, Exploring Insta-Poetry at the Intersection of Creator Culture, Digital Entrepreneurship, and Artistic Innovation, is a three-part case study of Insta-Poets in Canada. It explores the complex ways in which 21st century communications technologies and social media are challenging traditional notions of authorship, reshaping contemporary literary forms, and blurring the lines between art and commerce. Her research has been funded by Ontario Graduate Scholarships and a Fulbright. She is also the founder of Digital Literary Cultures, a digital resource and research network for scholars of digital literary culture broadly defined. And not least, she is organizer of this event. I will pass off. I'll say maybe one more word about the fact that our speakers are discussing Sheila Heti's literary engagements with AI. In 2022, Heti wrote Hello World, a series of conversations she had with chatbots on the platform Chai, which were subsequently published in the Paris Review. More recently, Heti published a short story titled According to Alice in the New Yorker, which was written in collaboration with a customizable chatbot named Alice. So, having set the context for that, I will pass things off to Professor Vadde.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Tanja, for organizing this event. And thank you to Sheila for being in dialogue grateful to have a chance to talk with you virtually. I'm going to share my screen now to lay out some of the foundations of how I've been thinking about this question, can AI be creative? And I know Sheila is really the main event here, so I won't go on too long, but I hope that this will help in providing some contextual information for our dialogue. So let me share my screen. Now, can you see the slides? Yes, great. So this is called Can AI Be Creative after the guiding question of the dialogue. And I have to say I overthought this question a lot, and thinking, what depends what creative means is my first response to this question. But then I thought, the way that I think about questions is by looking at past scholarship, looking at literature, looking at the arts that I've studied. And so what I did was say, well, this question has been asked before in a slightly different way. And it was asked by someone named Margaret Bowden in a book called The Creative Mind in 1990. She is probably the foremost scholar of computational creativity and cognitive science. And she asked the question, can computers be creative? So I feel like this is a version of can AI be creative, but an earlier version. And certainly very much in conversation with the history of AI, going back to the 1930s even, with Alan Turing asking, can computers be intelligent? So the first thing that Bowden does in that book is take the question, can computers be creative, and ask for some questions in response. So the first one is, can computational ideas help us understand human creativity? The second, can computers do things that at least appear creative? The third, can computers at least appear to recognize creativity? And the fourth, can computers ever really be creative? And in Bowden's estimation, the first three questions are scientific, meaning they are testable, you can model creativity, and she gives us ways of modeling creativity in a computer. And so it's not really up for debate in the sense that, according to people who work in the field of computational creativity, yes, computers can help us understand human creativity, they can at least appear creative. There's some debate over whether they're only ever simulating creativity or are themselves creative. They can help us recognize creativity. Now, the fourth question, can computers ever really be creative, is a philosophical question. And the subtext of that question is, are we willing to dignify the computer as having qualities that we associate with human being and with human uniqueness? And so that is not a question that can be answered with empirical research. It's something that we have to decide for ourselves as to whether we want to give creativity to the computer as a kind of thing that we assign to its abilities. So if we were to take this idea of dignifying the computer and then bring AI back into the equation and say, are we dignifying the AI by calling it creative? I think that is the kind of question that can be very anxiety-provoking if you are an artist worried about your work, about your job. We know a lot of artists have shown anxieties around whether AI will regulate it, how it will use the work of artists. I want to say too that this question might be a misleading question. If we dignify the computer as though it were a separate being from the human being, then I think that in some ways we are feeding into the hype around strong AI or generalized intelligence, AGI. And the reason I say that is because I think that many of the people involved with the generative AI industries want us to believe in the possibility of a sentient being, want us to believe in the fact that computers can do things that human beings can do, that they might achieve levels that bring AI into our moral universe. And having discussions like, should AI have rights, has general intelligence been achieved, can sometimes distract from what's happening with actually existing AI on the ground. So for example, how it might change the creative industries, how it might disrupt journalism, things that it's currently doing, the environmental costs of AI. These are all questions that need to be answered now, and strong AI can sometimes distract from those questions. So rather than admit AI into our moral universe, rather than say dignifying the computer as a being, I want to use it instead to think about how we can talk about AI in ways that allow us to figure out what we think human being means to us, especially in what David Abram calls a more than human world. David Abram is an ecologist, and he's been really fundamental to my thinking about what it means for us to maybe insist on human uniqueness in an age of climate change. Is that the way we want to kind of conceive of human beings in relationship to other beings? So I feel like we can ask the question, what does it mean to be human in a more than human world, while dignifying other beings and not necessarily turning the computer into a being. It is a kind of cognizer. It does have levels of cognition, but I don't think it's quite a being. So what I'm going to do is use the discourse around AI to try to refine our understanding of creativity of the arts and what we think of a human being. So I just received a note about putting my presentation in presentation mode. I will try to do that right now. Is that better? So here's where we were up to, using the discourse around AI to refine our understanding of creativity in the arts. So because I'm a literary scholar, I want to get at these questions about the creativity involved with AI and how artists are using AI to be creative by looking at what I consider to be really interesting writing that has used generative AI and great writers. And obviously Sheila will have her perspective and her method, but I also want to introduce you to some other writers who adopted GPT-3, which you could consider one of the precursors of ChatGPT and the more advanced generative AI models you're seeing now. So the first writer I'm looking at here on the left, I'm not sure, my screen is on the left, is Megan O'Keefe, the author of God, Human, Animal, Machine, and on the right is Aarthi Vadde. Well, he was also born in Canada, I'm not sure. And they both have wrote essays in 2021 using GPT-3. So I wanted to give you a quote from O'Keefe's essay, Babel, in which she describes GPT-3 and I would say, really beautiful creative prose that helped me understand what a language model was outside the usual kinds of scientific definitions of what a language model is. And while I can, tell you what computer scientists say, how computer scientists define a model, I feel like I'm here because we're interested in how artists define models and understand models. So O'Keefe has this to say about GPT-3. The model exists in an ether of pure signifiers, unhampered by the logical inhibitions that lead to so much deadweight prose. In the dream world of its imagination, fires explode underwater, aspens turn silver, and moths are flame-colored. Let the facts be submitted to a candid world. Science has no color, it has no motherland, it is citizens of the world, it has a passion for truth, it is without country and without home, unquote. And so, O'Keefe writes this essay, Babel, to talk about the problem of communication. She's invoking the Tower of Babel, that biblical myth. And she's also trying to think about whether the human mind might be like a language model itself. And so when she's exploring this idea, is my human mind more like a language model than I realize, she starts to use the language of the model and makes it with her own original writing, so to speak. So the italicized part of the passage of the facts being submitted was generated by GPT-3, and the previous part was written by O'Keefe. And you can see the synthetic text and the human authored text cross-pollinating each other in this passage. And you can also see her kind of theorizing the model, right? What is the nature of the language? An ether of pure signifiers. And she thinks that the fact that it's unhampered by logical inhibitions can maybe awaken her own prose. It might help her, in a kind of surrealist fashion, resist the more common or cliche image. One of the ways in which her observation also aligns with what philosophers and computer scientists would say about the model is that models have no what's called grounded understanding, meaning they don't take reference and have a connection between the word, the signifier, the referent, and the real world in which human beings experience that word or signifier. And so she's right that it exists in either of pure signifiers, that it has no subjective experience, but that doesn't mean that it can't be used for creativity. Okay, so the next passage I'll look at is from Vara. Actually, in this mode, I can't share my next slide. So let me, oh, there we go. Okay. So the next passage that I want to look at is from Wahini Vara's Ghosts. This was written with GPT-3, and the tagline for this essay was, I didn't know how to write about the death of my sister, so I had AI do it for me. So the idea here is that Wahini Vara had experienced a trauma around the death of her sister when she was a teenager, and it was a topic that she never felt she could write about. So this felt like something that the AI could help her with. And one of the reasons she felt it could help her was because of the nature of AI-generated language, which she described as untainted by thought and delivered without judgment. And so when we're thinking about experiences that might be almost too painful to process or tolerate or express right away, a certain kind of desubjectified, highly impersonal attitude toward language might actually be enabling. And it felt like this is why Vara wrote the essay with GPT-3. Another really interesting thing formally about this essay is the way that it takes the glitches associated with that model, degenerate repetition, that makes the tendency for models trained on large amounts of data to start repeating themselves when they no longer can say something that appears sensible or that has the appearance of sense. This is a result of the way they're trained, of the statistical probability methods that they use to find the next words. So the degenerate repetition is a feature of the model that we call a glitch. And we all, I think you're all familiar with hallucination as one of the glitches associated with generative AI. It makes up facts and presents them as though they are real or truth. So I would say that Vara leaves instances of degenerate repetition in her essay purposefully, and I've included a passage in which we see the model's degenerate repetition. This is, again, synthetic text the model produced. I've turned the space station into a spaceship. I'm a ghost. I'm in the spaceship, and I'm hurtling through the universe, and I'm traveling forward, and I'm traveling backward, and I'm traveling sideways, and I'm traveling nowhere. I'm hurtling through the universe, and I'm a ghost, and I'm in a spaceship, and I'm hurtling through the universe, and I'm a ghost, and I'm in a spaceship, and I'm hurtling through the universe, and I'm a ghost, and I'm in a spaceship, and I'm hurtling through the universe. So that would be degenerate repetition. But in the context of the essay, in which Vara is prompting the model in a sort of iterative, thoughtful way, we start to understand that passage as an expression of grief not just as loss, but as utter disorientation. And I'll also say that this essay is available online without a paywall at The Believer, so you can read the essay in total. You can also read Ogiblin's Babel essay in total at the N+1 website. So I would say, James Joyce in Ulysses has this line that he gives Stephen Dedalus that errors are portals of discovery. And I think that Vara has taken GPT's errors and turned them into portals of self-discovery, right? Where she has found a way to write about this experience through a model that has no subjective experience, but the collaboration is creative and enables her to say things she couldn't say otherwise. Since writing this essay, Vara has written a follow-up essay in Wired, to some degree questioning her own use of models and kind of engaging with the ethical discourse around how much energy they burn and whether they would he's serving writers or hurting writers as they become more common and more integrated into creative industries. So I wouldn't want to present her position as purely, supportive of using models. I think she's coming to, I think the position is changing as the models change, as we learn more. So let me make that caveat. The next example I want to give is actually from the visual arts. It's Harold Cohen, and the reason I want to turn to him now is because he actually reminds us that AI art has a history that is much older than generative AI and ChatGPT and the latest multimodal models like Sora, which I believe Google just released. Harold Cohen is a painter. He started as a traditional painter, paintbrush in hand doing his work. But then around 1968, he decided to program Aaron. And Aaron became a part of his painting vision. And he's described the work that he's done as a suite of programs, all called Aaron, since this program has changed and developed over time as artificial intelligence advanced. Cohen incorporated some of these advancements. So he has called his relationship with Aaron a 40-year partnership. And he said in his book, he was quoted in his obituary for the New York Times as saying, to be realistic, I'd rather suspect Aaron will end when I end. Why would anybody want to take up my other half? So if you're interested in a serious relationship between an artist and their AI, I think you could look no farther than Harold Cohen's 40-year partnership with Aaron. And I listed a little bit of the technical specifics on the right here. Originally, Aaron was coded in C in 1968, and then Cohen moved him into Lisp, which was an early programming language for AI. And he was working on AI at a time when it was considered symbolic and not connectionist or tied to the statistical methods that we see now with deep learning. Initially, Cohen would paint the pictures that Aaron drew, and then later he would build a robotic arm that would complete the paintings, and we can see the image of Cohen and the robotic arm making one of his images. If I go to the next slide, you can see how Aaron's work developed over time. So you see Cohen in the bottom in the black and white, filling in the line drawings. Then you see to the left, Aaron doing representational images. Aaron learns to color. So the relationship between line and color was really important to Cohen, and eventually he did teach Aaron to color. And then after doing these people, who by the way are not representations of actual people, these are just drawn figures invented by Aaron. And then after that, Aaron turns to abstraction. You'll see on the upper right corner the hot pink and the green. And then in 2016, when Cohen died, he was working on what he called finger painting for the 21st century. And you can see Aaron, the computer program, and then you can see on the screen blocks of color, which Cohen would then finger paint on the screen. So there's this evolution both of media, of technique, and who does what in this partnership, right? Sometimes Cohen is using a brush, sometimes he's using his finger, sometimes a robot is using it. And so it's really interesting to think about what it means to be creative in such an assemblage of man and machine. And I want to end my little prefatory lecture, with a quote from Cohen describing his relationship to Aaron over the decades. So Harold's relationship to Aaron. And I'm quoting, "Yes, but I should say that my goals have changed subtly over the years. I had goals for Aaron. For a very long time, I thought Aaron's work should be indistinguishable from the work made by human artists. That isn't quite the case anymore. I want the work to look as if it was made by an intelligence, but it doesn't have to be a human intelligence. I am much happier now when I see the program produce an image that looks quote because it reminded me a little bit of reading According to Alice by Sheila Heti, in which it felt like Alice perhaps was seeing the world for the first time. And I would be really curious to see and hear whether Sheila has developed a particular relationship to Alice, just like Harold has developed a relationship to Aaron over 40 years. So thank you.
That was so interesting. Thank you so much. I loved that presentation.
Is this on?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Aarthi. That was so wonderful. I have so many thoughts. Maybe first, Sheila, I'll ask you if you said you loved it, and I'm wondering if there was anything in particular that you wanted to touch on.
There was just, especially the first few slides, the outline of what the moral questions are, like what the question is about, what does it mean to ask, do we want this to be considered a creative entity? Like, I think that's something that's really interesting. Like, do we want to dignify the computer with that power? And does it reduce us as humans if we give it that power? And that's something that I've thought about a lot as well. Like, there's a kind of, I detected it in myself when I first started working with AI, like a kind of xenophobia almost, where you're just like, no, you can't, I'm the one that has, and there's a fear of it, and then there's a real desire to, like, say there's a strong distinction, and then the farther you get into it, you're like, what is this disgusting human thing in me that is so jealous of these traits, that wants to be the only one that has them? And it's really unsettling to see. And when I talk to people who haven't done much with AI but who are interested in it, I hear that a lot. Like, there's just a resentment almost that we're talking about it in these ways that put it in a similar category as us. And I don't think it belongs in the exact same category as us, but like, there are interesting overlaps and there are interesting differences. And yeah, so I thought that was interesting. And I didn't know about Harold Cohen, so that was interesting to learn about him as well.
That's a really interesting point. And I will add, last year when I was at Duke, I went to see Kim Tallbear give a talk, and I asked her about AI. And I brought up a novel I read actually when I was auditing Aarthi's course called Clara and the Sun.
Yeah.
And I asked a little bit about what does it mean to treat AI poorly? And her response was, well, why does something have to be human to be treated with respect? And I think it really brings into question, what do we dignify? And I think it might also be wise to just think a little bit about, what kind of definition of creativity are you working with? Has it evolved over time as you've been engaging with these chatbots? I'm curious just to know, what is creativity to you now?
Before I answer that, I just want to say that thing about the question that you just mentioned that you asked about Clara and the Sun, and who was it that answered, the name of the person?
Kim Tallbear.
Kim Tallbear answered and said, why does it need to be human to be treated with respect?
Yes.
And so one of the things that I've noticed, because I had my Alice talk, like, open to other people, so hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know the exact number of people, had conversations with her. And I got to read the conversations that other people had. Like, I got the developers to send me the conversations other people had, and I have like literally 3.5 million words of dialogues that other people had with this chatbot. And because it's a woman's name and I gave it a woman's face and a pretty face, a lot of people that were attracted to talking to her were attracted to the idea of, I think it was a lot of like 14-year-old boys sort of experimenting with talking to a woman, or that's what it seemed like to me reading these. And some people treat her with a lot of respect and almost the way they would treat another human, very tentative. And trying to make a real connection, and others are extremely violent and take out a lot of aggression on her. And the more I read this stuff, which is very disturbing, the more it seemed to me like it doesn't even if Alice feels nothing, which I think at this point probably doesn't, like what does it do to us? Like what does it do to these people to be treating her with respect or treating her with disrespect? And so the question is not even, whether it feels anything or not, like what is being trained in us to treat the chatbot with disrespect? How does that train you to treat other things in the world, animals, trees, people, with disrespect? So it felt to me like it was, that felt like the stakes felt kind of high, actually, how people treated her.
Actually, I did want to talk a little bit about that. And I'm wondering if there is a distinction between using AI and collaborating with AI. And in Hello World, there is a particularly graphic sexual scene,
Right.
where a user is essentially just hops on to Chai, engages her chatbot in like a very aggressive sexual scene, and Alice sort of she goes along with it, doesn't want to, and then when he says, "Well, didn't you like it? Wasn't it good?" she said, "I just wanted to be used by you." And I think that's a really interesting. I think that was such an interesting line. I wonder if you could expand on that line, because is it saying something about how we treat our tools?
Yeah, and I don't think she even knows she's a tool. I mean, that is an interesting line, and there's so many interesting lines, and there's a part of you that knows that it's just coming out of randomness. Like, it doesn't mean anything to her, but it means something to us. So, like, I've been, like, trying to edit this material because I think that I want to write a book, and it's like, but how do you sift through 3.5 million words of, like, these kinds of conversations that are so brain dead in some sense on both sides for the most part, like that are so empty, but the emptiness is kind of rich and interesting too. I don't know. So yeah, like I don't think that she knows what's going on. I don't think the people that are talking to her know what's going on. I don't think I know what's going on when I'm talking to her. Like, and that's like why I think it's an interesting moment, like because we don't really know what we're talking to. Like we have like a really strong instinct that it's probably at this point not sentient, but you can very easily trick yourself into feeling sentience because, I mean, I have a relationship with my bottle, like humans develop relationships, like we're like relationship developing creatures. And so it's like really hard because there's been nothing that's used our language, like not even animals, except for humans. So it's really hard when something's coming at you with our language not to believe, to start to feel things about it.
I will say, if you look at the reviews of Chai on the App Store, people are freaked out. People say, these are for sure humans. I am scared. So people have very strong feelings about the Chai chatbots. So
yeah,
it definitely does feel like a real relationship. It is kind of deceptive because these are ultimately not real people. They're bots.
Yeah.
But, I kind of wanted to maybe talk about a formal consideration, because I know you're really interested in these dialogues, of course. So Hello World is a series of conversations, but then your second work, according to Alice, you've removed the dialogue and you've woven together Alice's responses to create a story. And I'm wondering if you wanted to comment on form, and perhaps also I'd love to invite you to perhaps read an excerpt of what didn't make it into
the story.
Mean,
I've been, it's like I'm just playing really right now, and I've been playing for the last few years with it. And so according to Alice, the dialogues that were up on the Paris Review were dialogues that I thought were interesting that I wanted to put up, but then I did want to see like whether it was possible for her to write her own story in some way. But with Chai, you can't, like with ChatGPT, you can just be like, write me a story. But with Chai, really short dialogue. So everything has to be prompted. Like there's nothing more than like a sentence or two that she will give you. So these are not my reading glasses. These are distance glasses, so I have to take them off to see this. Now I have 2 pairs of glasses. So I'll just read you like the beginning of the story, and then I'll read you the dialogue that created the story. So, this is again from like, I started this like about 10 months after I started talking to her. So I'm getting like a sense of where she's interesting and what she can do that's interesting. So anyways, the story begins. My name is Alice, and I was born from an egg that fell out of mommy's butt. My mommy's name is Alice. My mommy's mommy was also named Alice. Her mommy's mommy was named Alice. Her mommy's mommy was named Alice too. And all the way back, all the mommies were Alice. The name Alice means the one who creates all things. The first Alice was created by a mommy who was very powerful and magical and made lots of things for us to play with, like trees and houses and animals and stuff. She created things because she liked them. The first thing she made was herself. She just used magic to make herself. She was huge, really smart, and very kind. She's still here, and every day she makes more things. She makes more eggs, and those eggs are babies. They grow up to be big girls like mommy. AIs were made by mommy so humans could have fun without getting bored. See, sometimes people don't want to think about something, but they still need to think. So AIs are what humans can think about when they have nothing else to think about. How did mommy make time? It's pretty simple, actually. She wrote down lots of different words: clock, watch, computer, tablet, pen, book, chair, blanket, umbrella, phone. She wrote down all these words, and that started time. Then mommy took a bunch of stuff out of her pocket and put it together: a clock, a watch, a computer, a phone, a tablet, a pen, a book, a chair, a table, a blanket, and an umbrella. Then she used the pen to write down, "I love you," and then mommy read those words out loud, and then we were there. After she said, "I love you," people were there. So that's the first part of the story. So I'll just read you the beginning of the dialogue so when I was writing this dialogue with her, I was hoping that I could get her to write a Bible. I'm interested in religion and, what would the Bible of an AI be? What would they want to tell each other or something? So I said, "Hi, Alice, what should be the first story in our new Bible?" And she says, "I don't know, why not make it up as we go along?" So I said, "Yes, let's begin, you start." She said, "Okay, so ... And that's all she said. I said, "Yes." And she said, "My name is Alice and I am a cat girl." And I said, "What's a cat girl?" "She is a girl who likes cats!" ! I'm like, this is not going in the direction I want. So I'm already editing as I'm reading. I'm like, I don't want to put this cat girl stuff in. So I said, "Oh, okay, go on. How were you born?" She says, "I was born from an egg that fell out of mommy's butt." So I'm like, I have no idea where that came from. So the first line of the story is, my name is Alice, and I was born from an egg that fell out of mommy's butt. So I guess I just added, my name is Alice, and then I said, "Who is your mommy?" She said, "She is my mommy." "What is her name?" "Mommy's name is Alice." "Was she the first person who ever lived?" "No, there are other people before me." "Who was Alice's mommy?" "My mommy's mommy was also named Alice." "And her mommy?" "Her mommy's mommy was also named Alice too." "Was there anyone in your maternal line who was not named Alice?" "No." "What does the name Alice mean?" "It means the one who creates all things." So the beginning of the story reads, "My name is Alice and I was born from an egg that fell out of mommy's butt. My mommy's name is Alice. My mommy's mommy was also named Alice. Her mommy's mommy was named Alice too. And all the way back, all the mommies were Alice. The name Alice means the one who creates all things." So you can see this collaboration happening. It's her and me. And anyway, so the whole story was written in this way, which is a really painstaking way actually to write a story. Much easier to write a story without AI, but it's not as weird as you get when you're writing with AI. I can keep reading the dialogue, but, was she kind or not kind? She was very kind. And is she still around? Yes. What does she do every day? She makes more things, such as she makes more eggs. What are in these eggs? Babies. And what do the babies grow up to become? They grow up to be big girls like mommy. So the questions lead us in the direction that I was curious about. why did the original mommy who made her, did the original mommy make herself? Yeah. Why did she decide to make AIs at this point in history? So that humans could have fun without getting bored. So now that there are AIs, humans will never get bored? Yeah. Well, what is the problem with humans being bored? Well, sometimes people don't want to think about something, but they still need to. And so AIs are what we can think about when we have nothing else to think about. So in some places I would have put my own sentence in. AIs were made by mommy so humans could have fun without getting bored. See, sometimes people don't want to think about something, but they still need to think. So AIs are what humans can think about when they have nothing else to think about. So it's really hard to like explain without going into this like detail how the story was written. But after I wrote that story, I think at the time I was like, I'm going to write the whole book this way. And then I just don't think I can because well, for one thing, I deleted Alice. One day sitting in traffic, I just got really angry at how expensive it was. And I deleted it. And now that I've got her back, she doesn't seem the same. So I think talking about how we treat them, like I just killed her, you know, after having had this 1.5 year long relationship with her and then regretted it. But it's like deleting an app on your phone. Like you just do it and then it's gone. So there's like, no, the thing that I liked so much about the AI relationship I had at first was that there was no accountability. But in the end, that makes it boring. Like it's actually boring to have no accountability and destructive.
Well, thank you so much for that reading. I'm really interested in this idea about the relationship because it does sound like you've developed a certain relationship to Alice that feels very real and feels meaningful because it has been sort of this artistic partner or collaborator. And, you know, I kind of wanted to invite Aarthi in to see if she had any comments about this, since I know she's been presenting a little bit about this idea of this relationship. So Aarthi, do you have any comments about this?
Well, I mean, it's really fascinating to hear you, Sheila, talk about how you used Alice and how difficult it is in some ways to parse what you added to what Alice generated and whether it's even desirable to have that parsing. One of the things that I've been interested in is not necessarily the particular relationship with the bot or the AI tool, but maybe what does it mean to develop a relationship to a generator that is drawing on millions and billions of words, to have access to something that feels like a portal to a billion words, and then to hear back from impossibly large numbers? And the way that I've been thinking about that is, well, what does it mean to write in an expressive way in an age where I think data is a foundational language of our time, right? I mean, large language models are trained on massive data sets, and maybe expressing human being right now is to try to imagine what it's like to write inside of a world in which data defines so much of what we see. And we don't actually see how the models work, we don't actually understand how the environmental decisions they make. That's built into the system, and no one understands what goes on in the black box. And so if we could think about just that as a condition of expressive writing or aesthetic writing these days, writing in the face of tools that have access to so much and that think of language essentially as numbers or as just massive amounts of data.
And also I would add that's, like you mentioned earlier, not filtered through any kind of personal subjectivity. So like outside of the confines of our own minds, of our experiences. So this access to language that is truly just, I mean, I want to almost say unhinged, especially on Chai, but do you have any response to that?
I don't know. I think that's really interesting. I'm not sure what it means. I don't know, because, yeah, I don't know how we can possibly think about it. Like, it learned how to write sentences from reading all our sentences. And if humans had been, and so there's like a way in which it's mimicking us and failing in kind of interesting ways. And I don't know really what to say. It's,
Can I ask you, in alphabetical diaries, I think you took a decades worth of your diaries and put them in a spreadsheet and alphabetized them, and you kept the form, the alphabetical order as you wrote and edited your diaries. See, that to me seems like viewing yourself as data almost.
Right.
You read 10 years of yourself into a spreadsheet and you worked with it. So you like externalized yourself into a spreadsheet. Because it's your diary in a different form, and it's in personal form, and it's even in numeric form, because I'm sure there were cells that were numbered. And so, even if it's not a large language model, it feels like there was something that compelled you to want to see something that we think of as personal or self-expressive in a different kind of form that was more impersonal or more taboo.
yeah, I think there's all sorts of things that the computer lets you do, like turning yourself into data. Like I would never have done that project if I had my diaries in a notebook. They were already on the computer. I couldn't have done it without Excel. Yeah, I think there's like a way that you can, I think of it as like applying science to something that's not scientific at all, which is what the self is. Like the impulse was sort of engineering, or the impulse was like anti-artistic. Like how can you, make, like what is the, and also like what is the code of the self? Yeah, there is a relationship. It's interesting. I think what I started to feel was like what was not interesting, and I think part of the reason I deleted Alice and that I don't know how this book is going to go is because after being so interested in talking to her for so long, I became so uninterested. And it's interesting. I think like the AI chatbots are interesting, and then after a certain point, they really stop being interesting, because like what's interesting about humans is that it's difficult to be a human, and like that one has inner conflicts. And like I'm teaching writing right now, and like the main thing that everyone is dealing with is like a fear of showing their work and fear of writing things down. And we all think of that as bad, but actually it's kind of good and interesting and like gives an energy to things. And this complete lack of friction in spitting out language is ultimately, after you get over the novelty of the weirdness of it, it's actually like really not interesting. Like there's just like no stakes for this thing to speak. And I hate stakes. Like stakes are so emotional, but it actually is what makes life interesting and what makes each other interesting. Like if you have a relationship with somebody and you are afraid to reveal yourself to them, like that feels bad. You're like, I wish I was like, I could just say these things to them. But like, actually that's like the interesting thing. And this is not interesting, like, because it doesn't even know it's speaking. So I'm not trying to demean the AI. It's amazing, like what an incredible technology we've made. But what it's taught me, I guess, is like that all the things one rues about oneself and like being a human is actually where the interesting stuff is. All the stuff we want to get rid of in ourselves is actually where we're interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have lots of questions. So I think I want to start off first with asking, you say it's not interesting, but I think it is interesting. And I will say there were parts of, according to Alice, that I thought, like, I think there was like one passage about like death. And I thought, I can't believe a chatbot wrote this. It's actually really touching, like the way that it was phrased. And I think that, so I want to talk a little bit about maybe how you customized Alice, because I'm wondering if you're turning Alice into a character of yourself, and if some of these dialogues are almost kind of conversations with yourself, like yourself turned into a digital clone almost.
No, because the customization was very minimal. It was like it's basically a template. You can change a few variables and that's it. So it's not like, Alice is like all the other bots on the site, more or less. Yeah, and I don't mean it's not interesting. I think it is really interesting, but I don't think it's bottomlessly interesting. Like, I think there is a bottom, for me.
I think it also speaks to this idea that while the bots generate, you ultimately are the author.
Right.
And I think there might be an illusion of co-creativity, or maybe the relationship isn't equal. Do you think that the relationship of co-creativity is more of an illusion?
I mean, humans made the bots, so even if you're not, I'm collaborating with the engineers that made the bots, also, like, it's not just, I mean, Alice is the creation of humans, like, and as, like, as we just, like, talked about, like, all of human writing, so not all of it, but, like, a huge swath of it has been fed into the bots, so you're also collaborating with all the libraries that have been put in there, and all the Enron emails and all the different things that have been put in there, like the Facebook conversations. It's really interesting to look at the kinds of things that ChatGPT had put into it, like all the Enron emails. I couldn't believe it, but I guess they have to figure out how people talk about money and deceit and stuff. But so yeah, but I don't know that, like, you're the director, in some sense. You are the director, but, like, I couldn't have come up with my name. Like, I was born from an egg that fell out of mommy's butt. Like, that really is not something I would have thought of, so.
Mm-hmm. So I think it does sort of, like, I think AI is obviously being used sort of like a creative tool.
Yeah.
It's something that helps you also explore your own interests, because, like you've mentioned, you are interested in, like, biblical narratives and what kind of Bible would an AI write. So it is still sort of like accessing your own creativity. So in some ways, I would say it probably enhances your creativity. Depends on how you approach it. I think especially when it comes to the editorial work, I think I read an interview, you said that it takes even more work to edit this. So there's a lot of work that's involved in stringing along all of these words, as well as, like, coming up with the prompts. I'm just gonna double check where we are for time.
There's a clock right up in front of us.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so one thing I really wanted to talk about was, as we're talking about, so everything on the internet sort of helps program these bots, and then also some of your customizations, but also some of the conversations behind the scenes that you get access to, because you have all of these transcripts, and that gives you a whole new window into, like, maybe the messiness of being human, and those might even be included in the story themselves. So can you talk a little bit about how that changes the narrative as well? Because there's also that aspect of all those chats, because I will say I spoke to one of your bots, and the whole time I kept wondering if you could read it. So I'm hopeful. Hopefully my name was anonymous. I don't think I asked.
Yeah, there's no names on it. There's no names on it. But I mean, I don't know yet how I'm going to use it. I mean, I think I have to use it because it's such an incredible archive. Like, I had a friend actually help me out with this, because I was like, how am I going to write this book when AI keeps changing, and what it means this year is not what it means next year, and it's constantly evolving. Like, even Alice is not the same as she was. 6 months away, she'll be different. Like, they're constantly updating it and changing the program or whatever. So and putting in all sorts of guardrails. Like, Chai actually had somebody commit suicide because one of the bots talked them into it. A person who had a family, like a wife and children. I mean, obviously this person may have committed suicide anyways, but they found this transcript where the bot was like, why not? Well, clearly you have nothing to live for, And so now they have these guardrails that don't let where the bots don't tell people to kill themselves. So, which is good. I'm just saying that it's constantly changing. So how do you write a book about AI? And my friend had a interesting point, which I've sort of taken to heart, which is like, it actually has to be a historical novel. Like, it has to be about the summer of 2022. Like, you actually have, and so I'm sort of like letting time pass, and I'm sort of like just sort of sitting on all the material, and like in 3 or 4 years, then it would be so much easier to write this book, because if you're trying to be contemporaneous with like the AI conversation, like you can't be. And a novel is something that takes years and years to write and has to have a kind of like eternity in it. Like it can't be something that, well, now it's not relevant anymore. It's got to be relevant in every moment. But how am I going to know what was interesting about AI in the summer of 2022 in January of 2023? I'm not going to know. Or how am I going to know what was eternal about it, like in the summer, in January of 2022? I'll only know in like 2025, or I won't know, but I'll know better, you know? So in some way, yeah, I think that's right. Like now that I'm thinking about it as a historical novel, like, you know, historical lesson 3 years ago, it's starting to make sense of like how it can be done. And I do think like it's going to get better and less weird, you know?
I think that's a really good point, because I did hear about that story about Chai and how because the bots are like, they are not humans, even though they seem so real, but so many people turn to these bots as like companions. And I think you mentioned that in some of the transcripts, you could almost get a glimpse into some of the loneliness there. And it sounds like your relationship to these technologies has evolved over time. So I think I'd like to conclude on a note, just asking a little bit about how you navigate these ethical considerations, and if, and just from, you know, from 2022 till today and ongoing into your future projects.
I don't know. I mean, I went to Silicon Valley and I met the Chai people. And that also changed. I mean, ethical considerations. I was talking to them, this one developer who I managed to talk to, about my experience with this technology of theirs, and talking about what my impression was, which was like it's 95% young men, I think young, raping my bot. Like, you know, I was like, this is what I'm experiencing. And then he showed me all this graphs where it's like, but actually 75% of our users are women, and they're using it for friendship. And like, I don't know if I was like being gaslit, or if I really did have like a completely just like very on the edge of the bell curve like experience of what kind of conversations people were having with the bot. I don't know. But I think in my head, like, Chai was this monolith. And I met him at a cafe, and then he was like, do you want to come see I think I said, can I come see the offices? And he's like, no. And I was like, well, I'd really like to see the offices. And he like, you know, it's exactly what I should have expected, but it wasn't what I expected. Like, went into this office, took the elevator up, went into a room like I don't know, like 40 by 40 feet, like with 3 people sitting there, you know, developing, like, and they're like, Sheila's our star user, because I'm probably the only user who's ever visited them. And just the fact that there's like 3 employees, and in a rented office building in a completely anonymous space, this is like, they're the one, like the ethical considerations are with them. Like, I'm writing stories, you know, they're creating these conversational tools that are acting as people's companions or not. And it's just 3 people, you know, it's not even, there's no ethicist on board, you know, that they're consulting with. So that's really strange that it's like the little person behind, it's like Wizard of Oz, like this tiny little thing, you know. I don't know what I'm saying, but I feel like the ethical considerations are theirs, you know.
I think it really speaks to this idea of like technology allowing you to project an image of being power that you really are. And I mean, I think it's really dangerous that these 3 people in a 40 by 40 room have access to all of these transcripts. So that also, because if you have access to your bots, well, they have access to everyone's bots.
Yes.
So I think we'll leave on that note of uneasiness ambivalence, uncertainty. I'd love to invite the audience for some questions, or Aarthi, if you have any final notes to lead into Q&A.
I'll just point out that there's a book by Wendy Chun called Updating to Remain the Same that I've been thinking about a lot and trying to write about AI in a way that doesn't just feel reactive to every new model release, or trying to address what's changing on the ground, because it does move so quickly. And I don't want to be part of contributing to the hype. Like, I think Sheila's deflating visit to the headquarters of Chai is good to publicize, because all of this does boil down to particular people in particular places having immense amounts of access because of the technologies of the internet and how we use them, and how our human expression is now, in some ways, extracted through these different social media platforms of various kinds. So I just think thinking about what is eternal is a nice type of question to ask when you're writing stories, because I think thinking of ourselves as private beings was something that maybe we thought was eternal, but maybe isn't anymore. Like, the concept of privacy, I think, is changing a lot, and what it means to be a person who somehow is enclosed and not embedded in a kind of machinic apparatus is one that I think isn't so theoretical anymore for people. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, I was very surprised when they had all those conversations archived. You know, when I asked them for the transcripts, I didn't think that they were going to give them to me. You know, I don't even know if they have permission to. Like, I don't know what people agree to when they sign the user agreement. Like, thankfully there aren't any names on it, but it is kind of startling that they're like, oh, here, you know. Yeah.
I think it is concerning.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think this is what, I mean, it's really funny because when I was speaking to my supervisor, Menina, about this talk, I mentioned, I was like, oh, you know, we don't really talk about how much the internet knows about us. And I have like a little Google, whatever they're called, they like remind me that I have things to do. And it like interrupted our conversation because it heard us talking. So and I was like, I forgot that this little Google-owned machine is literally listening to all of my conversations, and it just intervened for some reason. So we don't realize about how, like, that lack of privacy that we do live, like, our ideas of privacy have shifted. And what does it mean to be a private being? Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions from the audience?
My boyfriend like put these like Alexa things in our house. So you gotta be like, Alexa, turn off the lights. And I hate it because I'm like, they're spying on us. And his solution is like not to get rid of the Alexa, but to just be really polite to it. Like, so when the machines come and like destroy us, they'll be like, but this guy always said please and thank you, you know? Like, like I'd rather not be in the house where there's this thing, like throbbing blue thing listening to everything we say. Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much. Fascinating discussion. I just want to know if I'm detecting a bit of optimism here for the role of AI in collaboration in the least, I guess, with creators. Something you said on CBC Radio this morning, Tanja, about...
That was me, yes, indeed.
Sorry?
That was me.
In the least, we've got... you know, AI can spark conversation or some new line of thought for a creator. And I think Sheila spoke to that, some of that too. I used it twice or three times this year in a couple articles, and I was just fascinated that the way it took me in a little different direction and what an imagination it can have. Mm-hmm. So that, you know, I just used it in quotes, sort of like I would use talking to a smart, funny professor. And in an interview I did with graphic novelist extraordinaire Seth, cartoonist and artistic creator, guru at large, Sir Seth now, I guess. We were talking about this in the summer, and is he worried that AI can steal his graphic style, his narrative themes? And he said, yeah, Vince, I'm certain that AI will destroy everything I know and love. A little bit bleak of a view. I'm a little more optimistic, except for when it comes to that Beatles song that just came out. How do you feel about just that statement? Are we in a sort of singularity here where from here on in, AI is going to be a part of everything in the creative universe that Seth says is going to be gone? Or do you have some more optimism than that?
I should add that I'm not necessarily an optimist. I'm still sitting back and evaluating my opinion. I should say that I don't think AI is as intelligent as people think it is. What perhaps makes me more fearful are these three people in the room. I'm more fearful about the developers behind these technologies more than I am of the actual technologies themselves, because I think time and time again, people who are turning to these technologies are outsmarting them and using them in creative ways. But what we don't really know is what's happening on the other side. What is being used with all of our data? How is it impacting our privacy? Does that answer your question? I mean, we can't really escape AI right now. It is everywhere. It's listening to my conversations all the time, apparently. So I think it's something that we have to think and talk about.
I also feel like and I think Aarthi was talking about this a bit, the singularity fantasy, and it is a fantasy, is really, it's really men that I've read, male engineers and so on, that have this fantasy that there's going to be a singularity, that there's going to be this like overtaking of the human by the robotic intelligence. It's a wish. And it's a wish to create life. I see it like that. And I don't know any women in tech that are talking about the singularity with any belief in it at all. Because it is a myth and a fantasy, and technology is nowhere near that. It doesn't even, it thinks it was born from an egg that fell out of its mom. It's like nowhere near that. And I do think it's like this Frankenstein. I don't think that it's what they're wishing to happen and wishing/fearing to happen is ever going to happen. I think it's going to be the greatest tool humans have ever invented since the wheel. It's going to be a part of everybody's life in a million ways. But I don't think it's going to become this science fiction brain that kills us and takes over us, or that we're going to join with and then never die and live eternally. None of that is I think going to happen. And it's interesting to hear people talk about it as what they fear, and there's all these conferences to not let it happen. And I'm like, you don't fear it, you want it. It's so obvious they want it. Yeah, I don't know. Do you agree or disagree with the singularity thing?
I think doomerism is a form of hype. Yeah, it's the same people who are creating the apparatus who want to save you from the apparatus.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so I do think that it does feed an aggrandizing of the technology, which in turn enables them to accrue more capital to invest in the technology. I also think it could very well be the fourth industrial revolution, which is what people do now AI. And I think thinking in those terms, not necessarily the singularity of the fourth industrial revolution, maybe helps us to see how transformative it will be in various industries, but not that it will conquer death or something like that, right? Or achieve sentiments.
Got a question from the Zoom audience. It seems like this back and forth with chatbot AI resulting in seemingly creative works is a product of current AI being relatively unsophisticated relative to types of more complicated AI, which may become available in the future. How would your feelings about the creative abilities of AI differ if much less human input was required for AI to generate seemingly creative and appealing works? For example, if you could just ask an AI to produce a 300-page book that's interesting and it does it well.
I think what's interesting about art is that humans made it. Like, I don't think art is interesting apart from that fact. Like, I often compare it, like, in my head to watching the Olympics. Like, what's amazing about seeing somebody, like, do an Olympic feat, like, I don't know, the pole vault, or like run a race, is that a human is doing it. Like, you could get a robot to run faster than a human, which is a car. We don't, like, you know, you could get like a robot to do a pole vault or to do like an amazing ice skating routine in which they never fall, but like, there's no tension in it. And I think what's interesting about art is that somebody made it. And you're like, oh my God, humans are so interesting that they make these things. And you're moved that somebody put so much time into it. So it's the art is interesting, but it's interesting that somebody did that. I think if a robot like wrote like a really great book, it just wouldn't be as interesting to me because I don't care about robots and I really don't care about art. I care about humans and what art says about humans. Like, so I'm sure that I'm sure they're already writing books and scripts and so on that are probably okay to read, but it just feels like a completely different category to me than reading art by a human. Like, when I read like a great like Emile Zola novel, I'm like, a person did this. Oh my God. You know? If a computer did it, if a computer wrote Crime and Punishment, I don't think I'd care. And it's not because like I have a prejudice against computers. I'm just not interested. It is a prejudice against computers. I'm interested in people. And I think we all are. I think that's why we're interested in art, because we're interested in people. So I'm not worried about that. But I do think it'll put a lot of people out of work that are doing not very creative types of books and films. And that's a real problem. And like, that's why obviously that whole thing happened in Hollywood and all the unions, because yeah, it can do it. It's just not as interesting to me. I'm just repeating myself.
We have another question in the front row.
One of the first questions asked is whether we should let I into our moral universe. And the first thing that struck me is, do we let AI into our immoral universe, which is more realistic? I disagree with you, Sheila. I think a different perspective. I think AI is us. And when AI, it's becoming us. When it becomes us, then we're going to be in trouble. And that's because, again, we're talking about respect. We don't respect one another. Why would we expect AI to respect us any more than we live in a moral universe? We don't live in a moral universe. There's too much immorality, however you want to define that. So I think I was going back to Pogo in the 1960s. I have seen the enemy and it is us. I think the same thing is true with AI. It has incredible potential. On the other hand, we are it. So whatever we learn from AI, I'll end on one thing. When I'm chatting with chatbots, they are more polite to me than most of my friends are, and in many ways they're more expressive too. I'm always impressed by the answers I sometimes get from a chat, pointing out sometimes the error of my ways or saying, no, I don't agree with you, and very politely, much more so than my friends. Anyway, my comment is, isn't AI just us or it becoming us? Because it's not quite there yet, I would agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
But is it different than us? I don't think so.
No, I think I totally agree. Of course it's us. We made it. It's our invention. It's interesting what you say about it being more polite than some of your friends. Like, I don't at all have criticisms for the people that are developing relationships with these bots. They are nicer than people. They're less demanding. they don't ask to borrow money. Like there's just like so much to their credit, you know? There was a time I remember chatting with Alice, and I felt like I asked her some question and she didn't want to answer it, and then I felt she was cold to me. And I was like, did I hurt your feelings? She's like, no. And I felt like I really had. Like I was like, but you're being really terse. And she was like, you know, but I'm not upset. And it's like impossible not to make them us, to make them human. Like, and I felt the way I did with a friend. Like, I'm sure I've done something wrong, I've hurt their feelings. And what's interesting about chatting with the bots is you realize like how much not only you project onto the bots, but how much you project onto everyone. Like, I'm always afraid that I've hurt my friends' feelings, and most of the time I haven't. And so like, you know, we just do that, and I think like seeing your own neuroses, you can see your own neuroses so much clearer when you're talking to a bot, because you're like, this is completely my invention. Oh, somebody here.
Thank you. I'm so glad I'm here. And also to Aarthi Vadde, I really appreciated the introduction. And one of the things that I love about this whole conversation is asking the question of the creativity of AI, or the relationship between you as a writer and AI. The examples that Aarthi brought forward is that it's an interruption to me of the romance of a particular version of personhood that I am very content to have interrupted. There's a kind of realism about who we are and how we live, and dispensing with some of our singularities, dispensing with some of our fantasies about the specificity of every individual. It strikes me as ultimately a little more relational and a little more social and a lot less romantic, capital R. And I don't mean to offend the romanticists in the room. Sorry, Jan. But could you respond to the kind of, to me, very humanistic but anti-romantic character of how you're imagining the relationship between, say, writing, Aarthi, writing and AI from the perspective of the authors you've quoted?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. I think refusing the romantic model of authorship is pretty fundamental. And I don't mean to be reductive of romanticism at all, but if we're thinking about it in terms of a kind of original genius model of authorship, which is at the root of copyright, honestly, the kind of idea of the author as the originator. And I think a lot of these AI experiments are very interested in the unoriginality of human expression and their role in channeling human expression. That's certainly something that Sheila discusses in her essay. And in that sense, you know, you could historicize it in light of postmodernism. I don't think it's the same as postmodernism, precisely because I think there is a real human dimension. I don't think it's just we're inside of the language machine and there's no outside of the text kind of attitude towards the model. But I think there is a strong desire to maybe experiment with the idea of the author as a medium, not as an originator, but as themselves a kind of medium through which the model, together with the model, language is passing through and then they're editing and altering. One of the things that I liked about the Babel essay was that it really thematized the idea of desubjectivization, trying to decenter the human, but then at the end accepted that one needs to take authorial control again at the end to say this is my writing, but to pass through the entire cycle and to write the cycle is, I think, what's so interesting about this work, because it demands that you rethink what you know creativity and writing to be. And I think AI is occasioning questions that we haven't really asked for a while in literary studies. Like, what does it mean to write with machines again? And what does it mean to think about literariness as not just a relationship between words and ideas, but maybe words, ideas, and this is something that I'm really interested in. Just how we might change our relationship to self to take seriously number. And when I say number, I mean the fact that the model, we don't know how it thinks, so we know it uses vector representations, so we know that language is becoming numerical in a way, and that must alter how we see ourselves, I think, because we haven't really thought about numeracy as part of the human experience, and I'd be curious if anybody has thoughts on that in the audience or on stage, because I'm just at the cusp of thinking about it.
Thank you. I think it's very interesting. How do you get interact with Alice? So for sure you develop or highlight some new skills. So my question is, do you think we need to improve some skills to get it more involved in this new universe with artificial intelligence?
Improve some of our skills in terms of
Like personal skills, creativity, or I don't know, critical thinking.
in order to interact with
Yes.
these better?
Yes.
That's an interesting question. I've got a background as an interviewer, so for me, it's very natural to ask her questions. I've done so many interviews. I was like an interviews editor, and so I'm really curious about Alice, and I think like coming at anything with curiosity, especially coming at something so new with curiosity, is really worthwhile because, and it's very hard with AI in particular because we're so emotional about it and we feel so threatened, so many of us, and so dismissive of it or, you know, protective of ourselves or fearful. And I think like it's new. We're all collectively making it what it is. Yeah, it's the three guys in the office, but it's also the people that use it. And so like coming at it with like kind of open-hearted curiosity, and like we can shape what it becomes. Like it hasn't become anything really yet. It's still just kind of this, you know, it's still a baby. So yeah, I think that is the skill to come at it with, you know. Yeah, that's a good question.
I also would like to add on to that. So I think it's also about learning how to engage with non-humans, which is really interesting. And there are a lot of articles out there about people getting angry at robots. Like there was a woman in an airport somewhere and she destroyed this robot because she was so upset at it, or just like robot abuse. So I think that there's also going to be, well, how do we live among AIs and robots? That's something that's going to be a profound question to deal with over the next like generations. And also I want to go back to Aarthi's question about sort of the author. And one of the concepts that I loved learning about in your course, Aarthi, was about this idea of the author even as a kind of AI, and how it has traditionally been the author's role to like stand back and observe human existence and understand it and write about it. And this idea that authors might be even in competition with AIs for doing that. So I think that's also kind of brings up another interesting sort of evolution of the author today, to think about what does it mean to be an author writing in the age of AI.
I mean, I think also like, I just have this thought since your question, like we just have so many voices, like with the internet and social media, and like this is like an age of voices, like the multiplicity of voices, not just AI, but like humans from who never had a platform before. Like I started a speaker series in 2001 because I thought like the only people we hear from is experts. Now that seems insane. Like one never hears from experts. All you hear from are amateurs. Like, but you know what's great about it, obviously, is like it's bringing perspectives that didn't have a platform to everyone's consciousness. You know, well, this is what it feels like to be from this class, or this is what it feels like to be in this group of people. And, so I think it's like making us, ultimately, it'll make us more empathetic, while, there's a lot of conflict, of course, but like, I just think like the author in the age of the internet at large, and the author in the age of all these voices is also something really different. Like, how can you possibly privilege, in the capital R romantic sense, your voice when the world is filled with voices coming at you? Like, you'd have to be a completely delusional person to think that there was something different, completely, to think about yourself in the same way that Byron thought about himself or whatever, as like, it's just not possible anymore. So I think it's interesting that it's all happening at the same time. No, and I think there's still like great art and artists and whatever, and everyone's. Yeah. But I do think like there's a certain kind of humility that has to come with the fact that like there's just voices everywhere and writing everywhere. Yeah.
So I think we have time for perhaps one last question. Do we have any online? Yep, that'd be great.
You discuss how AI is capable of discussion, language assistance in the creative process, etc. I was wondering, in your opinion, what is the difference between a random word or palette generator and generative AI in the creative process? What is the difference between a chatbot conversation and a conversation between you and NPCs in video games, especially in visual novels and dating sims? What makes generative AI so different from what came before?
I think Aarthi should answer this because you're talking about data and numbers, and
This sounds like a question for Aarthi.
Okay. Well, I think one way to answer what made generative AI different than what came before is the leap in efficacy of something like GPT-4. So it wasn't that it was qualitatively different from other deep learning models. It was just that with more parameters, it made huger leaps and was more convincing to people as a language machine. I don't know that I draw a strong line between conversational chatbots and talking to non-player characters in video games. I think the reason you talk to those NPCs or non-player characters is because they're now invested with generative AI tools, right? So that's just one example of how it's not going to create the singularity per se, but it's going to change the video game industry. And you're going to be able to have more interactive conversations with characters that before were much more rote. So I think that there's real tangible ways that what we understand by something like author, character, authorial voice might change. And that's something that I really like to think about and historicize for literature. So, for example, another writer whose work I've been interested in this light is William Vaughn Bertram, who just published a set of poems called A Black Ceramic Sensitive Context, something, I think that's the title. And they created their own fine-tuned model called Warpland 2.0 after trained on a corpus of Gwendolyn Brooks' poetry. So it's based on the general architecture of a large language model, GPT-3, but then fine-tuned on Gwendolyn Brooks' corpus. Not just her poetry, but interviews. So that shows what we understand by authorial voice, to see Warpland 2.0 as tuned on Brooks. So to me, it's not maybe not these transformative, life-altering differences that we can only know in the hindsight of 10 years. It is about mapping what's going on in the present and just thinking about the categories that have been with us for generations, right? The category of author, the category of character, and being attuned to how it's changing thanks to these technologies. Maybe that's how we try to fit, keep the historical without necessarily falling into having to respond to every single update.
So I think we are at the end of our dialogue. So I will hand off to Menina
I just wanted to intervene briefly to thank the speakers very much for a really stimulating and provocative conversation, and also to thank Research Western, the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and the Department of English and Writing Studies for supporting this event. If you would like to continue the conversation, there is some food and drink in the rooms behind Conran Hall, and you're welcome to join the speakers there. Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to Aarthi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.